First speaker is John, gentleman here at the front, all ready to go. He's already told me he's going to be the first one to fall off the stage. Then if we do, John did it first. Righty, so John, over to you. Yay! Obviously. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Hi. Oh, yeah, I need it. Never used one of these before. Good afternoon. Last time I opened for an event, I used the line Happy New Decade, and that was January 2020. So please drink up. Okay. I'll start. So my name is John Pagonis. I'm a consultant. So I'll tell you things you already know, yeah? And at Zansi Labs, we help people basically build useful software. Well, I'm going to do this. Okay. So if you want to contact us, yeah. Right. So about a year ago, we're scratching an itch and we started interviewing UXers around the world, designers, researchers, content people, even their managers. And during the conversation, obviously in the well-prepared script, we would ask them, how do you know if you're doing a good job? How do you know if you're closing the loop? And the reason why we asked them this question is because a lot of them used to complain that they don't get enough love from the organization, that people don't pay attention to what they're doing, and that they were actually inserting friction into their processes. So naturally, we asked them, how do you know you're doing a good job, and therefore promote that good job to the rest of the organization? A lot of them people basically didn't have an answer to that. I don't know if you have. So that's what made me actually create this presentation today. So how do we know if we're doing a good job as UXers? We need to be able to have an answer to that, because that helps us promote user-centered design and UX within the organization. Yeah. The answer obviously is we must measure, because that's the only way we can actually prove we're doing a good job, other than just making money for the organization, which is again about measurement. Today I want to talk about measuring usefulness of a product or a service. Yeah, because it does no harm to actually measure usefulness, and definitely you can not go wrong when you actually do so, and you'll see why. So as Jakob Nielsen says, utility and usability are equally important, and together they actually make sure that a product is useful, both utility and usability. Yeah. And this is the grandfather of usability, and he puts utility on the same footing as usability, so it makes you think. So usefulness is a function of utility and usability. And the question then happens, how do you measure it? Well, you measure it on two dimensions, utility and usability, obviously. And this is a conceptual model where on one axis we have utility, on the other one we have usability. And there is a point beyond which, on the usability axis, something is easy to use, and a point where something is hard to use, if you like, conceptually. And the same applies for utility, on the utility axis. There's a point above which things are needed, below which things are not needed. And well, the bottom left quadrant, I call it the quadrant of total waste, because that's where products which are hard to use and not needed are being produced. And depending on which study you believe, since the 60s, most they say about 60 to 80%, but doesn't matter. Most of the software out there is rarely or never used. Most of the someone's nodding, yes. Rarely or never used. This is the quadrant of total waste. And you know what I mean, yeah? We've all been there, producing software for velocity sake that nobody wants to use or can't use. Next to this quadrant is the quadrant of, well, still waste, where basically we're producing art, yeah? It's not needed, but it's easier to use. Pointless, it's a hobby. But we still do that. And I call this line the waste line, not mine, but the waste line. Because below which we're just producing stuff that nobody needs. We're basically burning electricity and killing the Amazon, running software that nobody's going to use, yeah? Don't do that. When we start products, ideally, we want to be starting from this quadrant, where at least we have found what is needed. Therefore, we strive to produce things that are functionally adequate. And surely we can be in this quadrant of useful software where we have found what is needed and we made it easy to use. That's a conceptual model of usefulness. Okay. But how do we know if a product is useful? Yeah, I guess you know the answer. Well, we got to measure it. And what we can do, easily enough, believe it or not, is measure perceived usefulness. And perception is reality for the user. Yeah? What the user thinks is useful probably is useful. Yeah? Okay. The question is how we can do that. And for the past, more than 3 years, I've been working on measuring usefulness using an instrument called UMUX-Lite. Has anyone heard about this? Okay, a few people. Well, UMUX-Lite is a 2-item questionnaire which can be used post-study or in retrospect with regular users of a system. It's a 2-item questionnaire, so only 2 questions, on a 7-point Likert scale. It was developed at IBM by Jim Lewis and his team. It has been developed since. That has excellent psychrometric qualities. It has excellent validity and excellent reliability. It also maps back to SUS through regression functions and interpolation functions. And it has a very high correlation with likelihood to recommend questions like NPS. And it comes from the technology acceptance model, and that's why they call the utility axis usefulness as opposed to utility for historic reasons. But so if you read the papers or if you look at Jeff Soros and Jim Lewis' work, you will find usefulness there. Whereas they should say actually utility, but I'm not going to argue with them. Anyway, so it looks like this. The original version looks like this. That's the 2013 version. It asks these 2 questions. The system's capabilities meet my requirements. The system is easy to use. Very simple. We can actually implement this after a study at the end of, let's say, my usability session. Let's say we ask the user to actually try a couple of tasks. At the end, we can ask them. We can ask, as a retrospect study, users that regularly use a system, like you can actually have an interrupt survey or something popping up or in some other way, and you can ask the user, yeah? This is the instrument, the original one. There have been many versions since, and this is the one I typically use. You can say System X features meet my needs, if you like, or System X functionality or functions meet my needs. Or you can say System X is easy to use, yeah? These are the most popular variants. I have references for you if you want to follow them. There is this version as well that some people use. It's less reliable, but still valid. And it's this one which I hate. And the authors decided to agree with me and not to actually recommend this. Lately, the authors have simplified this further and have created this and given it a new name. It's UX-Lite. Basically, it's one of the other variants on a 5-point scale using the features term here. The reason why they simplify this to five items is so that they can combine it with the SUS or Super Q, so they can actually get more data just by adding one question to Super Q and the SUS questionnaire, if you're familiar with it, yeah? Is everyone familiar with SUS? That's a leading question, don't do that. Okay, so yeah, that's the 5-point version. Now, I'm just going to give you an example because it's not hard to actually implement this. So a couple of years ago, we ran a project that wanted to figure out a number of enterprise systems in the organization and where they would stand, basically benchmark the user experience of internal systems, yeah? So we went to measure perceived usefulness, and we want to triangulate, obviously, with qual research. So we conducted interviews at the same time as contextual inquiry. And because these were colleagues of ours that didn't know about us, huge organization, we actually had to collect the data through web forms, paper forms, because some people were working on black and white terminals, and emails, believe it or not, because they couldn't access any other systems, yes? The point is that because this is a 2-item questionnaire, it's very easy to actually collect the data, yeah? So we did this, and what you have to do is basically collect, let me show you, the answers on utility and usability, summarize them, do the statistics and summarize them, figure out the mean and standard deviation, margin of errors, etc. And repeat this for all of the systems in the organization. You can actually repeat it on a per journey basis, but that's a more advanced topic. And ideally, you want to repeat it on a per persona basis. But you get the idea, yeah? So what you do, you summarize for every system, yeah? Utility, usability, the aggregate usefulness, you find your margin of error, et cetera, and then you basically plot it on the perceptual map, yeah? Utility versus usability, and you get something like this. And you go like, all right, so we have 5 dots, so what? Yeah? But it's powerful, because this is the first time you have these 5 dots, and now you know where you stand. And basically, what this gives you is a baseline for future measurements. Now you can tell everyone, this is where our systems stand, and we will do something to improve these 5 dots and move them to a better quadrant. Very important. It helps you focus your efforts and prioritize for the future. Yeah, because you have these 5 dots, and now you know where you stand. Okay. Again, it can be conducted on a per persona or feature area basis, especially if you have humongous systems, yeah? Okay. How do you report this, though? Just 5 dots? Well, that's a good start. By looking at those 5 dots, you can find clusters. And in this particular case, you can plot the thresholds. And these thresholds indicate the good enough space, and I will explain. First, the clusters. In this particular example, we looked at this and went, okay, we have 2 clusters. What's so different between this and that cluster? And we went back into the systems and conducted some interviews and realized that the oldest application actually was the most successful one, and the newest one was failing miserable. And then when we thought, okay, well, why is that? And we realized that, well, these people have spent many years figuring out the utility of the product, and still they weren't above the threshold, and they had recently help from UXers, whereas this one was developed only by developers with no UX input. You can go back to senior management and say, well, I found something for you. Let's discuss. Let's talk. Yeah. Very useful. Okay, about those thresholds. If you observe, these thresholds are the 80% of the scale. And these are the good enough thresholds. Why? This is just to get you dizzy. Yeah? Basically, as Jakob Nielsen found back in the 90s, when you have self-reported data, especially if the user knows you're doing this or they know you, they tend to report more positively. Yeah. So the distribution is not really normal, it's skewed, and the hump is towards the positive side. So the threshold is at 80%. Since then, a lot of people have done research to validate this, and it stands true. And recently, Louis conducted the author of UMUX-Lite, conducted some research and discovered that maybe that number is at the 75% of the scale. Still, it's somewhere between 75 and 80%. Yeah, hence the threshold. And you can use these thresholds to actually answer the question: are we good enough? Yeah. So you can visualize, let's say, 3 different systems and many journeys in those systems on that perceptual map. I mean, you can put a gazillion of dots there, yeah? And actually go back to the chief product officers or to your team and basically try to answer, how good are we right now? Are we good enough? Yeah? And you can repeat this for every system and basically try to focus your energy. Like in this particular case, we have a web-based, a voice-based, and a mobile-based application that all serve the same product areas. So the product manager can actually go back and see which team is performing best, why things are not working. Perhaps savings when implemented through the mobile phone are above the utility threshold because they've nailed the user needs, but they haven't produced an easy interface. They need some more work in interaction design. You know, this map basically tells you where you stand. You can plot trend lines. That's an interesting one. So these trend lines on a release basis shows you how you have been improving or not as the product backlog evolves. Yeah. So you don't do it month to month, you do it increment to increment. And now you can go, oh, some people are nodding, excellent. And you can go back and figure out what happened for this product to slightly prove what happened here and why are we paying so much money for nothing to happen. Yeah, happens. Are we getting better or any worse? You can look at these trend lines and figure out what is going on, but not why. You need to conduct, obviously, qualitative work to figure the why. Yeah, this is just the what. You can, of course, do this with both utility and usability and see if there are any differences. Oh, so we see that basically utility is going down, but usability isn't going down. Interesting. Maybe this is a content application and we removed some content, or maybe we switched from people from from pro to trial, or vice versa. Yeah, you don't know. You have to basically figure it out. That's another way of reporting this data in time. Yeah. First you have to get the first dot, and then you have to keep repeating. Yeah. All right. Now, many times people need it in words, not in numbers, believe it or not, even for quant data. So what you can do is basically you can figure out on the curved grading scale that so many people use with the SUS, or on the adjective scale, where you stand. So you basically calculate your score and you see where you stand. And you can actually go back and say, look, boss, our users think we're doing poorly, or our application is fair, but actually, are we supposed to create top software here, top products? We need to put some effort, yeah? And you can map it back to the NPS. I'm not going to speak again, but you understand what I'm saying. That's another way of reporting this. And what you can also do is you can also the authors have a database of other applications they've measured. You can measure yourself against others, which is also very interesting. Especially, well, for consumer software more than anyone else, but there are numbers out there since 2017, I believe. And of course, there is a gazillion data using the SUS score. So you can map UMUX or UX-Lite back to SUS and then compare to what has happened out there. So you have a reference point to see how well you're doing. A few final notes. One of the things we need to be able to answer, especially if we don't have a huge sample size when we conduct this work, is how confident are we on the numbers we present to the rest of the team, to management, to the organization. Yeah? So when we do such work, I need to remind you that we must be able to produce confidence levels, basically the margin of errors around our findings. Yeah. The measurements will give you a mean based on your sample size. And in order to be able to generalize, you have to calculate the margins of error around the mean at a certain confidence level. And that's not difficult to do. It sounds very extreme, but it's not. Yeah. So then you can go back and say, look, boss, at a certain, I'm 95% certain that our mean is X, and our worst case is Y, and our best case is Z. And even if we look at our best case, we're below the threshold. I think we need to put some effort. I think we need more budget. I think we need to conduct some qualitative research. Yeah. This tells you that if you were to repeat the experiment 100 times, 95 times out of the 100, your mean would be here. And then you kill, well, you should be able to scientifically kill any ideas or objections against you just having only 20 or 30 answers and not having 2,000 answers if you're not doing consumer software. I come from the enterprise software where it's very difficult to have answers in the order of thousands. Yeah. I can actually say I'm really confident that our best case scenario is below a certain threshold or benchmark. And statistics and science actually is behind me on this. Let's talk. Let's figure out what we can do to improve the experience. Yeah. Okay, some parting thoughts. By measuring usefulness, we can answer how good are we right now. And as you saw, it's not expensive to do so. Yeah. Have we done our jobs well enough? Are we improving? These are pertinent questions if we want to amplify what we do in the organizations as UXers, if we want to improve the software or the service. Yeah. Are we improving? How do we compare against the competition or someone else? Because you can do that with your competitor products. You can basically recruit users and get them to work on the competitor product and then measure it. That's called intelligence. Yeah. So you can do, you can have a lot of market intelligence by doing this and then comparing against your competitor. These are the sort of questions you can answer with a simple instrument as UMUX-Lite. 2 questions that have been psychometrically validated to give you the right answers. Yeah. So I just want to remind you that a product that has low utility will lose to a product with high utility. And actually, it has been proven that utility is 3 times more important to the adoption of a product than usability. Obviously, a product has utility, has low usability, will lose to a product that has better usability. And if a product has no utility or usability, well, it will crash and burn. Usefulness is the ultimate weighing machine for a product's long-term ROI. Please measure it. Thank you. You, who's going to go first? I get 5 minutes for questions?
Yeah, and we also have to, thank you so much for the presentation. We've also got this quite odd thing.
Oh, yeah.
Which you basically throw around. We did actually knock someone else out at the last event. We throw this and then the audience can ask a question. It's a bit of fun. So, any questions? What have we got?
Who's going to go first?
Who's going to go first? There must be some questions. There was a lot going on that presentation.
Go on, raise it.
A lot of content.
You!
Josh, we got one of our speakers. Josh.
I don't want to hog the
Is
speak.
this- should I hold it?
So I speak into this.
I think you want to ask a question,
Okay.
yeah?
So I
All right.
you go first.
All right, ladies
you can hear my
first.
voice or not.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is new to me, but I have a question then. I was wondering, could you use this system also to evaluate whether what you have created has such a low utility that you should start, go back some steps and figuring out what you're trying to do?
Of course. I mean, I've used this in retrospect to figure out if systems have enough perceived utility, yeah? And one of the points I usually make is that you cannot improve a product's utility by actually conducting more usability testing. There's no way. You have to go and do generative research, yeah? So certainly. And that's one of the surprises when you conduct this instrument, because people expect you to just tell them about ease of use, and suddenly you tell them, well, yeah, there's a problem with user needs. We haven't targeted the right persona, etc., etc. By the way, there's an advanced version of this talk where we look at distributions, and then you can find basically if you have missed utility for certain personas or not. But yes, good question. Someone else? Or is it going? Oh, yep, that's closer. Sorry, Josh.
Sorry. How frequently would you recommend collecting this data? 'Cause obviously
Oh.
don't want to piss people off by constantly asking. What would be the minimum viable data?
Minimum viable data. Well, sorry, you mean the regular?
Yeah, the frequency.
How the frequency? I don't know. It depends on your organization and the audience. For example, do you have a charging relationship with a user? If you do, typically they want to be able to have their voice heard, especially if it's consumer. Is this an enterprise system where partners are using your system? Probably you want to ask them often. Is this a system that you actually deploy to colleagues? Run it once, see how bad or good it is, and then think about doing it again. The vector that will tell you how often you should do this is basically the vector of how often you change your system. Yeah. How quickly do you release new increments, significant increments? What has the qualitative work and evaluative work you did, let's say during usability testing, told you? Yeah. Have you picked up any signals? You will not, okay, you can use it without triangulating with other methods, but actually you should, yeah? There's no single answer. If you use if you want to plot the version on a release per release basis, then you pretty much know the answer.
Yeah.
You need to wait for the release to happen, plus, I don't know, a month or a couple of weeks for people to get accustomed to the software, and then ask them. Never do it a day after the release, because the numbers will be low. Yeah. Anyone else? Oh, Josh is not going to get it now. Okay.
Am I supposed to throw this?
Try. Heads down, please.
Or actually, no, look.
Oh, come on. That's so safe.
Thank you. Just curious to hear of any anecdotes where you've used this as bargaining power to.
As bargaining power.
Well, maybe not.
Ooh. Bargaining with whom?
Execs, if you're trying to motivate maybe a different decision or maybe more investment into research.
Okay. Bargaining. Okay.
maybe the word is similar.
This tool was used at a previous employer of mine by the senior management of the UX department to convince the senior leadership team of more budget. There wasn't much bargaining because we used this together with measurement of customer satisfaction, and we proved the correlation between UX and customer satisfaction. That's the next level, yeah? And when you have this data, it's easier to bargain or convince someone. Having said that, someone else said that, not myself. When the data don't fit someone's mental model, a lot of people typically throw away the data rather than update their model. So keep your expectations low, but try. I've seen it work in very big organizations, and it can work. You can use it for your team. You can use it for a department. You can use it for the whole organization. It depends on the maturity in terms of UX of your organization and who's doing the bargaining. It's very important. Yeah. But it does work, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Someone else, or I will give it to Josh? Oh, come on. Seriously? Okay, go on.
Oh, I'll toss it.
Have you used this in addition or in parallel with any other usability metrics like eye tracking studies or something? Can you give us an example if you have done so?
I've used it with customer satisfaction data.
Satisfaction metric.
Yeah, so we run in parallel UMUX with customer satisfaction, and then we measure the correlation.
Okay.
Yeah, and the correlation was above 0.80 something in most of the cases.
Okay.
So that's like silly. Yeah? It means they're completely correlated. We've used it actually very recently to triangulate heuristic evaluation and usability data as well. Moderated usability sessions, yeah?
Yep.
And of course, others have done it as well. In that graph I showed you, people have used it with, where is it here? With other techniques as well, other measurements. So it's, and as I said, it's it also correlates a lot with likelihood to recommend measurements like NPS, especially if you use the proper statistics around it. It's a very simple instrument to use, and you can add it to other questionnaires as well. Yeah, for example, you have the SUS. The SUS includes the ease of use question, so you just add one more question, and suddenly you have a parallel study, and you get numbers from SUS as well as UMUX-Lite. You can use it with SuperQ and with other tools as well. So I've done it, and other people have done it as well. No, Josh. Oh, come on, Josh. He has a good question, I'm sure. Give him the mic. Give him the mic.
One shuttle would have done from a hand. As it was, the French didn't use British shuttles. French shuttles. Every time there's a changing of the soldier guard, there has to be a changing of the shuttle guard as well. It's ultimately kind of the cultural determinations of how shuttles would be used shapes how they could be used. So you imagine in a time of French warfare, on that grass, the shuttle would very much cross over that 80% threshold of both utility and yet. Curious in this context, how does one grapple with the convention culture?
He didn't cancel. Okay. Yeah. Well, basically, you have to, and we have done that, you have to know who's answering the question. So the ideal version of using this instrument is to do it on a per persona basis, yeah? Where you know the behavioral characteristics, not the demographic ones, but the behavioral characteristics of the people answering the questions. Yeah, and there are ways, I was alluding to this earlier, that you can detect you have more than one persona answering these questions through looking at the distributions, especially if you see too many modes and distributions. However, having said that, run it once, see what comes out, and then you can rinse and repeat. Having some data is much better than having zero data, for sure. Yeah, but that's how I've used it, trying to actually target the right persona. And if we don't know the right persona, trying to detect whether more than one have been answering the questions, especially if you have a lot of data, you can slice and dice based on, for example, an enterprise based on the role. And it's not the correct way of slicing personas, but you can figure out if different roles in the organization answer these questions differently. Yeah. And of course, you do have personas. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. I didn't.